morning. My name is Lisa Hayes. I'm the Director of Collections here at the Library Society. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you to those of you who were able to come last night for our annual meeting. It's really nice to have a good turnout this morning, so thank you. Today's book club, we're going to be hearing from Kate Little and Gus Smith, who are members of our book club committee, and they're going to be joined on stage by Beverly Hutchison, who is the Executive Director of the D. Norton Child Advocacy Center, who will be helping us learn about their work advocating for children who are victims of child abuse within our community. Thank you all for putting this program together. And we'll have a time for audience questions at the end, comments during our program as well. I want to take a moment to ask you all to be sure your phones are silenced. If you could do that, that would be great. And I want to mention that our next book club is going to be on March 18th, where we'll present a book that's called A Flower Traveled in My Blood, which is a nonfiction book, the epic true story of the abuelas, grandmothers who fought to find their stolen grandchildren during Argentina's brutal dictatorship during the 1970s. It's a very good book, and we hope to see you here for that. So this morning, welcome, and thank you all for the program today.
Our book, The Names, is a high-concept novel that employs speculative and experimental techniques to explore a character's alternative lives. This genre, often referred to as a multiverse or parallel lives fiction, uses a what-if device to explore the multiple possibilities of a single human life. Parallel lives stories convey how reliving or redirecting a moment might change who a person becomes, or even alter the course of history. The Names plays with alternate timelines, but keeps its speculative element grounded in everyday domesticity. Its plot hinges on a single choice, whether Cora Atkin names her son Gordon, Bear, or Julian. Multiverse or parallel lives fiction frequently features experimental structural techniques, as traditional linear narratives cannot accommodate simultaneous diverging storylines. Authors often use interweaving or recursive looping structures to present the fluidity and complexity of human choice and possibility. Other popular examples in fiction are The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, Life After Life by Kate Atkinson, and Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. Knapp addresses this structural challenge by dividing the story into 3 concurrent timelines, each with its own arc, resolution across 7-year intervals. Novels depicting parallel lives necessarily involve repetition, as events recur in different narratives. Knapp avoids monotony in The Names by clearly differentiating the worlds her characters inhabit. For example, Julian's narrative involves a change in geographical setting as he is raised in Ireland. Consequently, his dialogue has a distinct Irish inflection that his counterparts lack. Although Cora's husband goes to prison, in both Bear and Julian's narratives, the murder victim differs. Perhaps most significantly, Bear dies in his storyline, while the other versions of himself survive, emphasizing the fragility of life. Strategic repetition and juxtaposition in The Names, such as the recurrence of the minor characters Lily and Felix, create echoes between the narratives. The differing roles Lily and Felix play in the parallel storylines underscore how seemingly minor decisions can result in drastically different outcomes. The novel's themes, symbols, and motifs provide additional cohesiveness, drawing together the separate narratives. The effects of domestic abuse lie at the heart of all 3 storylines, as the author traces the enduring impact of Gordon's violence on Cora and her children. Because The Names focuses on Cora as the core main character, we have chosen to focus mainly on the female victims, but it is important to acknowledge that men are also victims. For example, in South Carolina in 2023, out of 46 domestic homicides, 35 were women and 11 were men. Note to those who haven't read the book yet, sorry, there's already been some spoilers. We would like to note that we have found that in order to properly discuss this novel, necessary details of the book will be revealed, so we apologize in advance. The names demonstrates how the use of multiple timelines in fiction can enhance the complexity of characters, allowing their personality traits to be revealed more fully. Although Bear, Julian, and Gordon Jr. evolve differently, they share an innate sensitivity that reinforces the idea that there are three versions of the same person shaped by different circumstances. For example, even Gordon Jr., who initially mimics some of his father's abusive behavior, begins the novel with an underlying emotional vulnerability that becomes distorted by his father's influence. The ways Bear, Julian, and Gordon Jr.'s lives deviate from each other allow Knapp to explore the nature of human identity and experience, delving into themes such as fate versus free will, nature versus nurture, and the unpredictable consequences of choice. Before we delve into the characters in this novel, Gus is going to tell us more about the author's motivation in writing this book.
Good morning. Nice to see all of you here. Can everyone hear in the back? Okay, good. I always hate to go to a discussion and not be able to hear what's being discussed. A little bit about Florence Knapp. This is her debut novel. And before she wrote this novel, The Names, she was already well known as a heritage craftsperson. Not being a crafty person, I didn't know what that was. And I looked it up. It's a craft that has gone down through at least a couple generations. For example, our basket weaving here in Charleston would be a heritage craft. So what she was known as a heritage crafts person. 20 years ago, with young children at home, she began a sewing blog that focused on English paper piecing, a specialized type of hand sewing that drew a devoted community of fellow makers. Florence wrote extensively on the craft, lending her expertise to books and magazines, but all the while she was experimenting with fiction on the side. In 2022, Florence spent 6 months working on the first draft of The Names, a novel that tracks the fallout of domestic violence and the ordinary decisions that can shape a life. For me, says Florence, the actual violence is not the main point of the book. The point is how people survive awful things and then go on to heal. When asked about what led her to write about domestic violence, she said, about 6 months before I started writing The Names, when it was still the pandemic, a woman from a domestic violence charity came to speak to a women's group that she belonged to. While she was talking, Florence said she was struggling not to cry. And I felt like I couldn't cry because here was this woman talking that this was her job and her reality every day. When you're learning about domestic violence, I think there's always a part of you that thinks, why would anyone stay? Even though you hear all the reasons why women don't leave. And Florence said when she walked alongside Cora in this novel, every time Cora would try to do something to change her situation, Gordon had a roadblock to put up. By the end of it, Florence said, I felt as though I understood why someone stays and why they might believe that it's the safest choice for them. She said she was drawn to write about it for those reasons, but also the ripple effect that violence plays a huge part in this novel. She said, I wanted to write about how people can heal from those situations and how it goes on to affect their lives and the people that they become, but also how they're able to go on and lead meaningful lives, how someone actually recovers and remakes themselves after those kind of experiences. When talking about the book today, let's remember the number one lesson. Never ask the victim, why don't you just leave? It's one of the most harmful myths about domestic abuse. Leaving isn't easy when someone's scared, isolated, and manipulated. Why doesn't she just escape? Now that certainly has a different ring to it now, doesn't it? It's definitely not quite the same question you started with, but it is the right question if you sincerely want to know the why. Asking why doesn't she just leave? It blames the victim and implies that she's at fault for not casually leaving a dangerous situation, as you might simply depart a restaurant you don't like. But when we ask the same question in the more proper context of escape, the implications are clear. The victim is blameless, and leaving is often dangerous. So let us instead examine, why doesn't she just escape? According to statistics, 75% of domestic violence-related homicides occur upon or shortly after separating from an abuser. And this risk can persist for up to 2 years. Simply put, leaving a dangerous abuser can put a victim's life in grave danger. Victims fear leaving, and the statistics support that their fears are not unfounded. Kate's now going to walk us through a character analysis and think about that question with Cora, who is the core of the story in each of these different stories. Why didn't she just escape?
One of these is mine. This one. It is? Oh, sorry. Oh, we're going to get there in just a second, actually. Okay. Cora Atkin. Knapp named her protagonist Cora, as she is the core of the story. Although the novel focuses on the unfolding lives of her children, particularly her son, it is Cora's initial decision over her son's name that drives the plot. Introducing her as a young mother, the story spans her life from the age of 18 to 68. A former ballet dancer, Cora is Irish, but left her homeland to train as a dancer at the age of 14. The text implies she met and married Gordon at a vulnerable point in her life when her injuries were likely to end her ballet career. Cora is central to Knapp's exploration of the effects of domestic abuse. Insights into her thoughts and character build an intimate portrait of the harm done by psychological and physical maltreatment. The novel demonstrates how Cora is constantly alert to danger, monitoring her husband's unpredictable moods and developing survival strategies designed to keep herself and her children safe. Suppressing her own needs, she appeases and mollifies Gordon Sr. to curtail his cruel and violent outbursts. At the same time, Cora experiences guilt and self-doubt. Recognizing that her daughter Maya emulates her placatory behavior, she reflects, isn't she just teaching her daughter that keeping the peace is more important than doing what's right? Cora's battle between taking the safest option and doing what is right is encapsulated in her indecision over naming her son. Although acquiescing to the name Gordon would maintain the status quo, she feels it would also be a betrayal of her son, dooming him to follow in his father's footsteps. Choosing Bear or Julian represents her desire for her children to break free of generational cycles. A question that came to me while reading was, if a mother or a parent doesn't like the name given to a child to begin with, can it subconsciously affect their parenting? Cora's fate differs according to which name she chooses, demonstrating the large impact of small choices. Her decision has a profound impact not only on her son's life trajectory, but also on her own. Naming her son Bear provokes the most violent response in her husband, but the act of empowerment sparks the courage to call for help when he attacks her, ultimately saving her life. In this life, her character experiences dynamic growth as she embraces her independence, becomes a gardener, and eventually finds happiness with a new partner, Felix. Cora feels a similar sense of empowerment when she names her son Julian. Her belief that she has done the right thing sparks a resolve to stand up to her husband. However, Gordon kills her when she attempts to leave, erasing her presence from the narrative. In Gordon Jr.'s narrative, Cora's character undergoes a much more gradual growth. This is the life in which she suffers most, as her decision to reluctantly name her son after her husband adversely affects her bond with him. She also endures many more years of escalating domestic abuse. While her situation seems hopeless, she displays a glimmer of agency in her repeated attempts to leave her husband. Cora's eventual liberation from her marriage in this storyline is all the more satisfying due to the arduous journey she undertakes. Bear Atkin is our first name. When Cora chooses Maya's preferred name for her son, he grows up to fulfill his sister's prediction that he will be soft and cuddly and kind, but also brave and strong. The most confident version of Cora's son, Bear possesses a joyful and infectious appetite for life. His intellectual curiosity is expressed in his early career as an archaeologist. Knapp implies that Bear is relatively untroubled by anxiety due to his father's absence. As Gordon is imprisoned for killing their neighbor Vegan when his son is still a baby, Bear grows up free from his toxic presence. Consequently, Bear reflects that what happened when he was a baby feels so divorced from the life he's known that sometimes he finds it hard to believe at all. Early in the novel, Cora's choice of the name Bear seems to be the correct one. His character embodies breaking free from generational cycles as his warm, loving relationship with his mother and sister starkly contrasts with his father's cold mistreatment of them. However, the unanticipated consequences of his name emerge as his global travels cause him to neglect Lily, his childhood sweetheart. When Lily almost dies in a terrorist attack, Bear realizes that he has felt the need to live up to the adventurous associations of his name, causing him to act like some kind of idiot Indiana Jones. As a result of this epiphany, Bear matures, settling down with Lily and nurturing their daughter Pearl. The loving atmosphere of their family unit is the antithesis of the abusive domestic dynamic created by his father. Bear's unexpected death highlights how each incarnation of Cora's son features a delicate balance of benefits and disadvantages. He lives a richly rewarding life, but his allotted time is brief. Julian Atkin. Cora chooses the name Julian for her son because it means sky father, ethereal, transcendent. As Maya later explains to her brother, it was her way of saying you'd never be like him, that you'd rise above him. However, she does not anticipate that the choice will result in Gordon killing her when their son is a toddler. Consequently, Julian grows up motherless and is raised by his grandmother in Ireland. He identifies as Irish, and his nationality is reflected in his accent and the inflection of his dialogue. Julian harbors a deep hatred for England, perceiving it as the land of his father, the land that failed to keep Julian, Maya, and their mother safe. Julian's character illustrates the far-reaching impact of domestic abuse on family members. Although his memories of both parents are indistinct, he is haunted by the knowledge that his father killed his mother. The novel illustrates how inherited trauma influences Julian's character, rendering him sensitive, introspective, and cautious. Above all else, Julian fears that he may have inherited his father's violent nature. Anxiety over hurting others makes him solitary and weary of relationships. Julian's storyline illustrates the process of slow healing as he emerges from the dark legacy of his family's history. His character demonstrates the therapeutic nature of art and creativity as he discovers a powerful means of self-expression in jewelry making. However, his marriage to Orla becomes strained due to his inability to let go of the past. Julian reaches a pivotal moment in his arc after almost losing his family due to his unresolved trauma. He overcomes this obstacle with the help of his sister Maya, ultimately realizing that he is nothing like his father. This epiphany finally allows Julian to fulfill Cora's aspirations, rising above his father's shadow and embracing a big and fearless life. Gordon Atkin Jr. When Cora complies with her husband's wishes and names their baby Gordon, the foreboding sense she feels about the decision adversely affects the bond between mother and son. Convinced that she has destined her child to become like her husband, she can only perceive Gordon Jr. through this lens. Her subsequent aversion to breastfeeding her son and impulse to let Gordon deal with his namesake's indignant howls conveys a sudden repulsion toward the child she formerly cherished. Knapp illustrates how his mother's emotional detachment prompts Gordon Jr. to turn to his father. Consequently, his character is increasingly shaped by Gordon Sr. Gordon Jr. unwittingly contributes to his mother's abuse as he learns that inventing lies about Cora is a guaranteed method of gaining his father's approval. The reward he receives for his misogynistic behavior and a lack of integrity is later echoed in his interactions with Lily Atkin. Charting a pattern where Gordon Jr. gains social acceptance by harming members of the opposite sex, the novel encourages readers to share Cora's belief that her son is a replica of her husband. Gordon Jr. undergoes the most dramatic character arc in the novel after crashing his car and losing his lucrative job in investment banking due to an alcohol addiction. He discovers it is a surprising relief to lose everything, as he can no longer hope to meet his father's expectations. Revealing the sensitive side he has suppressed in an attempt to impress Gordon Sr., he rebuilds his bond with Cora, demonstrating empathy and compassion. Knapp presents Gordon Jr. as Cora's unlikely savior as he blackmails his father into liberating Cora from their abusive marriage. His transformation indicates that a name does not necessarily determine one's character. By redefining himself, Gordon Jr. breaks free from generational cycles. Maya Atkin. Cora and Gordon's daughter Maya is 9 years old at the beginning of the novel. Sensitive and empathetic, she is attuned to the undercurrents of the household, understanding the danger that her father represents. Maya's character vividly illustrates the effect of domestic abuse on children. Although her father has never physically hurt her, witnessing him abusing her mother has left her psychologically scarred. Consequently, Maya is mature beyond her years, modulating her behavior to placate her father while attempting to protect Cora. After Cora names her brother, Julian, Maya's suggestion that they have lasagna for dinner, a dish her father loves but she dislikes, vividly illustrates how she imitates her mother's behavior, ignoring her own needs and desires in a futile attempt to maintain harmony. Recognizing that she is unwittingly teaching her daughter subservience, Cora fears this pattern will repeat unendingly, the destiny of each generation set on the same course. The novel illustrates how Maya's life trajectory is profoundly affected by Cora's choice of name for her brother. In all three narratives, commonalities emerge that underscore her core traits. For example, she recognizes she is gay in every storyline, but is reluctant to come out due to the disgust she believes her father would feel about her sexual orientation. She also continues her role as a caregiver into her professional life, becoming a homeopath in both Baron Julian's narratives and a doctor in Gordon Jr.'s. Meanwhile, significant differences in these alternate lives highlight the large impact of small choices. In Bear's storyline, she enjoys a close and loving relationship with her brother, contrasting with the resentment she feels towards Gordon Jr. In Julian's narrative, Maya is the most severely impacted by trauma, having been present when her father murdered her mother. As a result, she lives tentatively, clinging to the safety of her grandmother's home and familiar routine. In all three narratives, Maya's character undergoes an arc. Although her life continues to be impacted by trauma, she gradually breaks free of its stronghold. Gordon Atkins Sr. Horace Husband Gordon is the novel's antagonist. A general practitioner, he is well liked by his patients and perceived as the ideal husband, attentive, accomplished, impeccably dressed, athletic, and a good father. This outwardly charming veneer masks a manipulative, volatile, and controlling personality. Gordon exerts coercive control over Cora, using physical and emotional abuse to gradually strip his wife of all her autonomy. He exploits his status as a doctor to conceal this abuse and suggests that his wife is mentally unstable. Across the three narratives, Gordon is portrayed as a destructive force, harming his wife, traumatizing his children. However, his degree of influence in each story depends on Cora's actions. Gordon's impact is minimized when Cora names their son Bear, as he's imprisoned almost immediately for killing their neighbor Behan, disappearing from his family's lives. Meanwhile, Julian, is depicted as more damaged than Bear, as he is a toddler when Gordon is killed. Gordon kills Cora. In Gordon Jr.'s narrative, the full effect of Gordon Sr.'s malignant presence is felt as he shapes his son and inflicts many more years of abuse on his wife. His character embodies generational cycles of abuse, as he is revealed to have been shaped by the cruelty of his own father. Throughout most of the narrative, Gordon is depicted as a static character, incapable of empathy or self-examination. However, at the end of the novel, he is depicted as regretful, reflecting he had one life and he could have spent it differently. The Names is ultimately a survivor story, one of healing and moving forward to create a life worth living. But how about the ones who do not? Today, here with us is Beverly Hutchison. Beverly is the executive director of the D. Norton Child Advocacy Center here in Charleston. The mission of the D. Norton Center is to lead and coordinate a child-focused community-wide response to prevent abuse, protect children, and heal families. Our community has a long history of advocating for children who are victims of abuse. In 1975, the Junior League of Charleston identified some gaps in services available to child victims in the Lowcountry, as well as a failure of community agencies to communicate and collaborate in the best interest of these children. The result was that many children were experiencing harm in the aftermath of abuse. In 1988, with the encouragement from the Junior League and the Charleston County Legislative Delegation, appointed a committee to study our community's response to child abuse. The committee identified the need for formal coordination of services to children at risk in our community and recommended establishing a center for this purpose. With leadership from the Junior League, our state's first child advocacy center was established in 1989 as the Lowcountry Children's Center Incorporated. The CAC model provides a one-stop shop to better serve victims of abuse and their families while also supporting the investigative process. The center opened its doors in March of 1991 at 1061 King Street. In 2001, the Lowcountry Children's Center was renamed the D. Norton Lowcountry Children's Center in memory of one of its founders and longtime volunteers, D. Norton. In 2017, the center was renamed the D. Norton Child Advocacy Center to better reflect the nature of the work we do for the children in our community. I was involved in the organization for quite a bit of time, so when this novel came up and we decided how important it would be to bring in the reality of the fiction in the book, we thought to invite Beverly to come in and educate us all in what Florence explained in her earlier focus of writing the book. So Beverly can join us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to be with y'all today. not only as an avid reader myself, yes, I read the names twice, also the daughter of a librarian, but also as the executive director of the Norton. It has been my privilege to be part of that organization literally since the day that they opened. Ruthie Norton as a friend and mentor, and I'm just so proud of our community and how we have stepped up in a better response for children who have experienced child abuse. Let's talk a little bit about the scope of the problem. And I'm going to talk about all types of abuse, and then we'll focus on domestic violence victims. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, very prevalent. Sexual abuse and physical abuse, as well as domestic violence, does not care where you live, where you went to college, or how much money you make. These typologies cross all socioeconomic boundaries. 19% of child abuse in South Carolina last year was reported to be domestic violence. Historically, our systems have focused mainly on the adult victims. But what we have learned over time is the unintended victim is very often the child. Children are 46% of the time there are children in the home when domestic violence is reported. Even if that child is not struck, is not harmed physically, they are still experiencing that abuse. Increasing the attention that we keep punching the button. Increasing attention to the needs of the children is something that we continue to strive to do. Even at the Norton, we've recognized, even though we've been doing this work for 30 plus years, just in the last couple of years, we have refocused our efforts in improving our service delivery to the youngest victims, those children under the age of 5. And you think about in a home of domestic violence, it really came home to me when our therapist who offers child-parent psychotherapy, which I'll mention again later, was explaining to me the why. She said, Beverly, you've got a home. Domestic violence is happening. You've got mom who has a 4-year-old and a 3-month-old. And the 4-month-old is acting out because of the trauma they've experienced. There's all this violence in the home. She's carrying the baby around on her shoulder all the time. That baby is absorbing her mother's trauma. We know that. There are brain studies now that tell us that we know that. So what do we do with that child? Luckily now there are some evidence-based treatments that we're beginning to be able to offer to better improve our services for those very little ones. The littles, we call them. If you hear nothing else, remember this: exposure to domestic violence is child abuse. It is legally defined as a typology of child abuse. We also know that exposure to domestic violence often cohabitates, if you will, with physical violence or sexual violence or other types of violence in that home. Exposure includes, when I say exposure to domestic violence, that includes seeing, hearing, seeing the aftermath, or hearing about the violence from another party. And like I said earlier, national statistics tell us that children are very likely to be in the home where domestic violence takes place. We also know that domestic violence is underreported because of many of the book illustrates that really well, right? Why doesn't she report it? Why doesn't she do this? It's just not. It wasn't something that was even in her ability to process intellectually that she should because of the potential harm to her family. So we know that one, it's underreported. 2, we know very often that the parent will recant when it comes to going to court, and they see what might happen as a result of court, and what might happen is the breadwinner in the family goes to jail, and mom has no way to feed or house her children. She has no credit history. She has no car. These are the things that impact the mother's decision. So how does that exposure affect our children? So immediate reactions can be everything from that generalized anxiety to sleeplessness, difficulty concentrating, high levels of activity, increased aggression. Those last 3 very often in a classroom will show up as bad behavior, as a child who has ADD or ADHD, when in reality They're a child who is coping with trauma at home. Several years ago, I had the privilege of sitting in with one of our multidisciplinary staffings. Those are meetings that happen every week at our Child Advocacy Center where our staff and members of other agencies like social services and law enforcement share information about a particular child's case. And we come together to make that coordinated response and to do a better job of helping ensure parents get what they need. This particular case, it was a case of domestic violence, as it turns out. As we're talking about this case, there's been a report this child was falling asleep in school all the time. They couldn't understand what was going on. And in the interview that we did at the Norton, the forensic interview, the child disclosed nothing, no harm was done to their person, there was no indication of physical abuse, but there was a sense that something still wasn't right. In that MPT case staffing, the police officer in the room raised his hand. He said, wait, tell me that name again. He said, yeah, we've been called to that house 5 times in the last 2 weeks, in the middle of the night. The child's falling asleep in the classroom because they're not sleeping at night. So these immediate reactions can manifest themselves in many different ways in our children's behavior, and we may not be able to recognize it for what it is, an exposure to trauma. Long term, we know from studies that there are greater impacts if we do not address the impact of child trauma in childhood. There are a host of potential negative consequences as that child ages into adulthood, including physical issues, an increase in obesity, heart conditions, behavior problems in adolescence. Very often these children don't have good decision-making around alcohol, drugs, and sex. Performance in school, as we talked about on the last slide, that inability to focus and concentrate, to be constantly in that state of fight or flight, is going to impede their ability to concentrate and perform well in school. And then as they become adults, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder can be very prevalent. This next slide. Okay. We'll go with this. Delete this slide. So as I said earlier, exposure to domestic violence is trauma. And if we don't address that trauma in childhood, there are a lot of negative impacts. Children often who don't address the impact of domestic violence can carry many of the feelings that they experience as that child who is fearful into their adult relationships. That fear, that shame, that sense of betrayal can infect all of their adult relationships, interfering with their ability to bond and to form healthy long-term relationships. We also know, and it was really, I don't normally read books about the work we do. It's just, what I do every day is hard enough. This was a hard book. But I would like to say, one of the things that impressed me with Florence Knapp and how she approached this was the sensitivity she has to every character in the book. And she portrayed what we see every day pretty well. In particular, one of the things that has always been a challenge for me personally in working with child abuse victims is understanding that a child can love the person who does the hurt. So in the book, you see it. You see Gordon striving for his father's approval. Even Maya, as a young doctor, wants her father's approval, even though she knows and lived through everything he did to them. Children they just want that person to not do the bad thing, right? They love their parents. They don't want the trauma to happen. So that can result in shame. Why didn't I stop it? Why didn't I protect my sibling? That shame, all those emotions can carry over into adulthood if we don't address it. It's a lot of heavy stuff, but there's good news. So the good news is we live in a place that puts children's welfare first. We live in a place that has a children's advocacy center, a place where all of the agencies within our community come together to do a coordinated and comprehensive response to child abuse for child abuse victims. And so that, because we've already defined that domestic violence that exposure is child abuse. Our response that we do and have done since the early 90s is appropriate for child abuse victims of domestic violence. The really good news is kids are great. They really are. They are built to be beautifully resilient. One of the amazing things that I've seen in my years at D. Norton is that there are children who experience horrific abuse who show no signs of trauma. They have no symptoms that are impairing their ability to function. But there are those children who do have symptoms. And so what do? We know without a doubt that one of the most impactful things that a child can have in their life when they've experienced abuse is a protective caregiver, whether that's the biological parent, an aunt, a foster parent. Having somebody who can say, I hear you, I'm sorry that happened. It was my job as the adult to keep you safe. It is not your fault. Is so significantly important to children who've experienced trauma. Children move forward when we intervene, and when those children who have mental health issues, who are showing symptoms of PTSD and anxiety, we need to offer evidence-based treatments. Evidence-based treatments meaning those treatments proven in the field of research to work. I mentioned one earlier, child-parent psychotherapy. We live in a world of acronyms. CPP, that's the intervention that I talked about for children who are 0 to 5. It works with a caregiver, helping to improve that young child's behavior, equipping that caregiver with positive parenting skills. Most of us parent the way we were parented. If you grew up in a house full of violence, that generational violence can continue. Even when you know, and this is what happens with these parents, they know it's wrong, they want the tools, and so those parents are wildly successful with CPP. The other is really the gold standard treatment for mental health treatment, which is trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. Trauma-focused, we're going to talk about what happened. Cognitive behavioral, we're going to teach you some skills, some ways to manage your emotional response to the trauma. That's generally for children 3 to 18. We also, during COVID, began to offer many of these therapies through telemental health, which has just expanded our ability to provide more services to more children in our community. So what can we do? We ordinary people. Well, let's state the obvious. We ordinary people sitting in this room, and I don't know exactly how many people here, but my statistics tell me that it is likely that somebody in this room has either experienced trauma themselves or knows someone who does. And so I won't hope that my words today respect your experience if you have had trauma in your background. We believe children are worth it. We believe children are innocent. We believe children can and do heal because we see it every day. Believing that in your core, even when you're faced with really horrible circumstances like what we saw in this book, is really key to changing a child's life. So some of the things we can do: understand that children of all ages are vulnerable, and vulnerable to the impact of domestic violence, not if they are themselves harmed. Years ago, we hosted a conference, and at the beginning of the conference, we played an audio of a 911 call of a young child. Her father had entered the home, and she was, we had people who'd been in this work for 40 plus years openly weeping. This child was terrified beyond belief because she was worried her father, who had never harmed her baby brother, might this time. So she had never been harmed, but you could hear in her voice the impact of that trauma. Luckily for her, somebody intervened. And that's the first step, right? As parents, as caregivers, as people who I'm now a grandparent, how do we talk to our children to empower them and equip them? We let them know it's okay to talk to us about anything. When they come to us with that thing that might be uncomfortable or embarrassing, we need to model behavior that shows them we can handle it. We got it. You can tell us anything. So that when something should happen, might happen. They know that you're their safe person. They can come to you, you're going to remain calm, you're going to listen to them, you're going to believe them. We're going to foster their self-esteem, showing them they're lovable, huggable. I read some statistic the other day about the power of a hug, that physical touch. How do we make sure that our children know and feel our love for them? That's a shield for them from a lot of trauma. Builds their resilience. Communicate to children that the violence is not their fault. One of the services that we offer to Dean Norton, because we do believe and know that having a caregiver and a protective, supportive caregiver is important to a child, we will work with a caregiver. And one of the services that we offer is something called a protection clarification. That's where the protective parent is going to literally write a letter to their child and say, when this happened, when Dad did this, using the book for an example, he broke the rules. It's my job to keep you safe. I didn't do that. Moving forward, I'm going to act in this way to better protect you. Incorporate your family's culture into interventions. Incorporate your rules. Talk about your rules. Talk about consequences. Really spend a lot of time communicating with your child. And lastly, if you need help, if you know someone needs help, I could not leave you without some information on the screen about help is available. Help is available in abundance in our community, whether it's by phone to a national hotline, whether it's a place to stay, to get shelter from harm at my sister's house, or whether you're referred to Dean Norton for our services. There are services here for families. There are ways to help children and families heal. Thank y'all for your attention. I'm so proud to share the work of Dean Norton with you, and I look forward to answering questions.
Really want to thank Beverly for joining us today to really illuminate the trauma that Maya, Bear, Julian, and Gordon Jr. went through in each of the different storylines of this novel, which leads us to open up now to discussion. And we have a microphone, one or two?
We got two, yeah.
We have two. So if you would like to answer a question or say something, please wait until you have the microphone so everyone can hear. And so I think we can start off with a question and go from there. So in which of the three narratives, Bear's, Julian's, or Gordon Jr.'s, resonated with you the most, and why? Any particular narrative? Did you find them believable in each one? Was it believable that it was Gordon Jr. who turned around? Can anybody really turn around like that and become his mother's savior after he's been her abuser? What are your thoughts on any of those characters?
I had a question, Beverly, which is, you read the book, you know the three scenarios, which is most likely in terms of outcome of the abuse that is described?
Yeah, this is going to sound like I'm dodging the question. I'm not. I think each one has a believable outcome. And you, Kate, you alluded to it when you went through the characters, which is each of the three main characters, the boy, Bear, Julian, and Gordon, had a different amount of exposure to the violence. And we know that that trauma compounds. And so when you see Gordon Jr., who's the child who is most exposed to his father, in my interpretation of the book, he seems the most damaged because that trauma is repeated and repeated, and it has compounded without any intervention. Whereas Bear, as a baby, his father ends up going to jail, very little exposure. I think it's interesting at some point in the book where, I hope I'm not mixing them up, where Bear is curious about his naming and the date of his naming and the death of this man, and how is that all connected to him some way? So you still get a little sense of some of that trauma still that he carries that with him.
And actually, playing on that question, and a question for you is, Gordon Jr., he ended up joining in per se on that. How often do you think you see, does that happen frequently where that part, I think, I understand the mollificate, you're wanting to mollify behavior, and I think that behavior would differ between a female and a male child. But that did seem pretty abrasive to me, or it seemed pretty abrupt to me that the male child kind of chose in his mollification to join in on the protective parent.
So I need to be real clear here that Dean Orton and as their representative, we know things about children. We're not as well versed in adult trauma. So I want to make that really clear. But to your point, I think what I see in that and what I see with the children that we serve is Gordon Jr. wants his father's approval.
Mm-hmm.
His father, he can see that his father is the dominant figure in their house, and he wants that. He wants that approval. And as now this is me talking as the reader, not the person. I see the father grooming Gordon Jr. And we know clearly, I'm back over here, with especially sexual abusers, they groom their victims. And I saw some of that, I thought, in the novel, how the father grooms these children, and we know that domestic violence can be transitional. It can start small and get larger and larger and larger, and that's very evident, I think, in the book as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I think there's some compassion to be had for Gordon Jr. He's just trying to find somebody to love him.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Back to your question, I found the Gordon section the most difficult to read, not just because of ongoing violence, but also the power and control that he showed over her. And I remember being so relieved when she went to the vet and got out, and then disappointed when the next section she's back in. But the story really held to the literature and what we know about statistics. That I think it even quoted 7 times as the magical number, but it's just really demonstrated that because she felt like she had no way out. She would lose her kids if she left. And so it just showed the helplessness she was experiencing.
Yeah. Do you think the author handled the issue of domestic abuse in a sensitive way? How do you feel the author handled this? Because, when you say domestic abuse, I've had people, I don't want to read something about that. And I was curious when this book was recommended, very curious, because I'm like, how's this going to be handled? Personally, I thought this author did an amazing job at dealing with something so horrific. What do you think, Beverly?
I have to agree. Like I said earlier, I normally don't read books about the work that we do. When I read this, I walked away thinking exactly that. It was real. She didn't play up the violence for the sake of violence.
Yeah. Of shock value.
For me, it made it believable. And she included attributes in the children and in Cora that we see in the work that we do every day. Real thing. They're real people. And I thought it was very sensitively done, and with a certain respect for all those impacted.
I wondered, just on a practical level, are the children that Dean Norton is handling, are they children that have been, are they post, living with the abuser, or are they still living with the abuser?
Can be both. That really depends on where the investigation is with social services or law enforcement, and if the child if a safety plan can be put into place in the home without removing the child. There are a number of factors that go into removing any child from the home. that we take seriously. And so we can enter at any point in that intervention. And so if a child is referred to us for us to do a forensic interview, then that might be early in the process, or that's because that actually is part of that active investigation. Excuse me.
Because I would think that with the abuser being in the home, that would increase the abuse if the abuser was aware of the fact that there was someone in the city.
Yeah, and that's where we would work with DSS and hopefully put in a safety plan. And a safety plan might mean that the father cannot be in the home until the investigation is completed. And DSS, I think I'm right, DSS, not law enforcement, would be the one that would help make that determination. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
This novel begins, I'm sorry, was there somebody else? I missed you, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
On the previous point, I thought that the name Bear seemed maybe a little unlikely as a choice that you would give him, but it was so touching and moving to me that she would choose the one that her daughter had chosen, which showed to me how complicated a decision like that is. It's not just about the mother and the father and his baby, but his sibling is a very important part of her decision. And I imagine in your work that is often, it complicates a lot of decisions.
Complicated is the right word. You hit on something, that whole concept of sibling guilt. What did I do to protect them? Why didn't I stop this? That care between the siblings. Yeah, that's complexity.
I'm sorry. Do you think Maya's choice of Bear was in response to her father? That this is who she wanted the male sibling to be like? Soft, cuddly, strong, but also soft and cuddly. Was she naming him in response to who her father was?
I don't remember the first one.
This novel started in 1987. Do you think, as a society, we are doing a better job about domestic abuse, recognizing it? Did I miss a question again? Somebody there? Go ahead, before we...
We'll start here, then we'll do an answer to that last question here, yeah.
Go ahead, you comment, and we'll go over to the question.
Mine has to do with the question you were asking earlier about the characters and that sort of thing. I think when they each reach a trauma point, then the author takes off and goes to another one's story. So it was actually the hardest for me was that you knew the next character coming up was going to have another horrible kind of event, so you're just waiting to see how it happens.
So it's sort of a bait and switch.
Yes. And so you know it's going to be happening. Why do you think the author chose this style? You could have told 3 full stories with the characters coming in, at all times, and do a whole 1/3 of the book. But she goes back and forth. Sometimes it's 7 years, sometimes it's not. So mine is about, I think the structure prevented me getting involved in, because it kept me more painful.
Interesting
What's
concept.
going to happen next?
So the switch prevented a full-on assault of emotions and switched to another interesting point. I hadn't thought about it. Okay. We had a comment over here.
I think that's going to be after your last one.
So mine is in response to what you said about how we're doing as a society. It really broke me when she left and reached out to a veterinarian in her area because she didn't know where else to go. And his response to her in reaching out to a Dean Norton-like place in their area. I'm a retired hygienist, and when I first started in the 90s, we were not taught to look for any signs of abuse. And we see a lot of children from many different socioeconomic backgrounds. But like you said, it doesn't really matter your income level. But later on in my continuing education, we were taught signs to look, and it's not just bruises, it's, you know, their actions and all. And I think that the answer is yes, that we are doing so much better now as opposed to just as recent as the 80s. And I think Dean Norton in this area really, I know that you all do continuing education type courses for, you know, all kinds of health professionals, not just nurses. But I think that yes, and we are fortunate in this area that it's very well known and people can Google a number now. But it broke me when she went to a vet because that was a source of, you know, a safe harbor for her. So, but thank you for all that you do and your education out there to everyone.
Just before we end, I'm just curious, last question, a show of hands, who liked the novel? Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm glad you enjoyed the book, Library Study Book Club pick for this month.